Welcome to Heartline Stories. Today's story follows a homeless woman who gets the chance to shower at a billionaire's mansion. But what she uncovers after will shock her and change everything. You won't believe what happens next. Stay tuned and let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Once upon a time, in a busy city filled with tall buildings and crowded streets, there was a woman named Clara. She was homeless and spent her days wandering from place to place, trying to find shelter and food. Life had been hard for Clara ever since she lost her job at a local cafe and could no longer afford to keep her apartment. She had no family to help her, and each day was a struggle. One chilly morning, after a long night spent in a park, Clara wandered through the city. She passed by a huge mansion that caught her eye. The house looked beautiful and grand, with big windows, lush gardens, and a tall gate surrounding it. As she walked along the sidewalk, she noticed a man standing outside the gates. He was tall, well-dressed, and looked friendly. "Are you okay?" the man asked as he noticed Clara standing on the sidewalk, looking tired and dirty. "You look like you could use a little help." Clara was surprised but didn't say much at first. People didn't usually talk to her in the streets. She had become so used to being ignored that she wasn't sure how to respond. But the man's warm smile made her feel safe, so she decided to speak up. I'm fine," Clara mumbled, feeling embarrassed about her ragged clothes. "I've just had a long night." The man looked at her closely, then smiled again. "I'm David. I live here in the mansion. You look like you could use a warm meal and a shower. I have a guest room inside. You can clean up, get some rest, and I'll make you some lunch." Clara blinked in surprise. She had never met anyone like David before. A chance like this seemed too good to be true, but her tired body and dirty clothes made her desperate for a break. She didn't have much to lose, so she agreed. David led Clara inside the mansion. It was even more beautiful on the inside. The walls were lined with paintings and everything was clean and polished. He showed her to a bathroom with a giant shower and soft towels, then left her alone to freshen up. Clara stepped inside, feeling the warm water wash away the dirt and coldness of the streets. She closed her eyes, letting the water soothe her. When Clara finished, she wrapped herself in one of the soft towels and walked into the living room. David was already sitting on the couch, waiting with a tray of sandwiches and fresh fruit. He smiled at her and offered her a seat. "Take a seat, Clara," he said kindly. "You've had a long day. Let's eat and talk." As Clara sat down, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. She began to tell David her story, how she lost everything, and how she had been struggling to get by. David listened patiently, nodding as he took in her words. "You've been through a lot," David said, his voice filled with sympathy. "I think you're stronger than you realize." Clara smiled faintly. "Thank you for being kind to me. Most people wouldn't even look at me." David nodded. "Not everyone understands what it's like to be in your position, but we all go through hard times, and sometimes a little kindness can make all the difference." Clara felt a warmth in her heart. For the first time in so long, she felt like she mattered. After lunch, David took Clara on a tour of the mansion. It was a world so different from anything she had ever imagined. The rooms were filled with beautiful furniture, grand chandeliers, and bookshelves stacked with books. She had never seen anything like it. But as they walked through the mansion, Clara noticed something strange. There was a locked door in the hallway, hidden away behind a thick curtain. She hadn't seen it before, and it piqued her curiosity. "What's behind that door?" Clara asked, pointing to the mysterious door. David hesitated for a moment, his face going a little serious. "Oh, well, it's just a part of the house I don't usually show anyone," he said quickly, trying to change the subject. Clara was curious. Why would there be a locked room in such a grand house? What was so secret about it? David noticed her curiosity and smiled again, but this time there was something different in his eyes. "Maybe one day you'll find out," he said mysteriously. Clara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. She didn't know why, but something about that locked door made her wonder. What could possibly be behind it? Just then, David's phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. He looked at it quickly, then turned to her. "I'm sorry, Clara, but I have to step out for a bit. Why don't you relax here for a while? I'll be back soon." Clara nodded, still thinking about the locked door. But as David left the room, she decided she couldn't let it go. Something told her she needed to know what was behind that door. She waited for a few minutes, making sure David was really gone. Then, feeling nervous but excited, she walked quietly down the hall toward the mysterious door. Clara reached the locked door, her heart racing with curiosity. She gently touched the cold handle, but it didn't budge. The door was clearly locked, but there was a small keyhole, just enough for her to notice. She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "What's the worst that could happen?" she whispered to herself. She glanced around the hallway to make sure no one was coming, then started to look for anything that might help her open the door. The mansion was large, and Clara knew there must be a key somewhere. She walked back to the living room, where David had left his phone and keys on a small table by the door. But just as she reached the table, she froze. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Clara quickly backed away, her heart racing again. She turned to leave, but just as she did, she heard David's voice. "Clara, what are you doing?" Clara turned to face him, her hands instinctively hiding behind her back. She smiled nervously. "Oh, nothing. Just looking around." David's expression softened, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "You seem curious about the door," he said, his voice calm but serious. Clara didn't know what to say. She felt caught. I, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to invade your privacy," she stammered, hoping he wouldn't be upset with her. David sighed and walked towards her. "It's not that. It's just, there are some things in this house that are better left unknown." Clara stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" David paused for a moment, then took a deep breath. "That door, well, it leads to something that I'm not ready to talk about yet. It's a part of my past I don't want anyone to see." Clara's curiosity grew even stronger. "But why hide it away? What's behind the door?" David's face grew more serious. "It's complicated, Clara. I'm not ready to explain it yet, but I promise you, there's a reason why it's locked." Clara felt a mix of disappointment and confusion, but she nodded. "I understand," she said softly, though the mystery still nagged at her. David studied her face for a long moment, then offered a small smile. "But if you really want to know, maybe one day I'll show you. But for now, let's just enjoy the day." Clara wasn't sure if she believed him, but she appreciated his honesty. "Thank you, David. I really appreciate everything you've done for me." David nodded and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Of course. And don't worry, you're welcome here anytime. I know life can be hard, but everyone deserves a second chance." Clara smiled, touched by his words. She had no idea what the future held for her, but she knew one thing for sure. This day, this mansion, and David's kindness had changed her life in ways she never imagined. But there was still something she couldn't shake: the locked door and the secret behind it. It was clear now that David was hiding something important, something that might just explain everything about him and this mansion. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to David's past, something he wasn't telling her. It was like a weight sitting on her chest, pressing down every time she thought about that locked door. What could possibly be behind it? And why was David so secretive about it? As the day went on, David tried his best to make Clara feel comfortable in the mansion. They had lunch together in the grand dining room, and he showed her around more of the house, all the while trying to distract her from the door and the mystery that still lingered in the back of her mind. But Clara's curiosity grew stronger with every passing hour. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The mystery was too big, and she couldn't stop wondering what David was hiding. Later that evening, when David was busy in his study, Clara decided to take matters into her own hands. She quietly made her way back to the hallway where the door was, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to know what was behind it. The house was quiet, with only the soft sound of David's footsteps echoing through the halls. Clara took a deep breath, and without a second thought, she grabbed the key from the table. It fit perfectly into the keyhole. The door creaked open, and Clara stepped inside, her heart racing with excitement and fear. The room was dark, but there was enough light filtering in through the windows to make out a few shapes. She stepped further inside, her eyes scanning the room. It was unlike any other part of the mansion. On the far side of the room, Clara saw a large wooden chest covered in dust. There was a thick layer of cobwebs across the corners, and the air was thick with the smell of old wood. Clara walked towards the chest, her footsteps soft and cautious. Her fingers brushed against the old wood, and she felt an odd sense of déjà vu. There was something about this chest, something familiar. She knelt down and slowly opened the lid, her heart in her throat. Inside, wrapped in an old faded cloth, was a stack of letters. Clara picked up the top letter, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, and she could immediately tell it was from someone important. "Dear David," the letter began, "I hope this letter finds you in good health. There's something you need to know." Before Clara could read more, she heard a noise behind her. She spun around in panic, the letter still clutched in her hand. David was standing in the doorway, his face pale and his expression unreadable. "Clara," he said softly, his voice filled with regret, "I told you not to go in there." Clara stood frozen, the letter still in her hand. She didn't know what to say. She had crossed a line, and she knew it. But now the mystery was only deeper. What was David hiding? And what was so important about these letters? David walked into the room, his gaze fixed on Clara. "You shouldn't have seen this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But now that you have, I guess there's no turning back." Clara's heart raced. She wanted answers. What was behind all of this? What was David's secret? "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I had to know." David took a deep breath. "There's a reason I kept this hidden, and you deserve to know the truth. But this is more complicated than you think." He motioned to the chest. "Those letters, they're from someone I lost a long time ago, someone I love dearly, and they hold the key to everything." Clara stared at him, confused. "What do you mean? Why hide it all?" David's eyes were filled with pain. "Because opening this chest means opening up the past I've spent my whole life trying to forget." Clara could see the conflict in his eyes, but she knew she had to understand. "I want to help," she said softly. David looked at her, the weight of his past still heavy on his shoulders. "You really want to know?" Clara nodded. "Yes." David hesitated, then stepped closer, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's a story about love, loss, and a promise I made, a promise I broke, and now it's a secret I need to confront before it's too late." Clara's mind raced. What had David been through? And why was this all so important now? "Tell me," Clara urged, her heart beating faster. "I want to know the truth." David took a deep breath and finally spoke. "I'll tell you, but you have to promise me something." "What?" Clara asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Promise me that no matter what I say, you won't look at me differently, that you won't judge me." Clara nodded. "I promise." David took one more breath before he began. "The truth is, these letters are from my late wife, the one who left me." Clara's eyes widened in shock. "Your wife?" David nodded. "Yes. She left me after I made a terrible mistake. I loved her deeply, but I couldn't be the man she needed me to be. And because of that, I lost everything." Clara felt a pang of sadness for him. She didn't know what to say, but she could see the pain in his eyes. David wiped his eyes and continued. "I was too focused on building my business, on gaining wealth, that I neglected the one person who mattered most. When she left, I was left with nothing but regret." Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry." David looked at her, his expression softening. "Thank you, but that's not the end of the story. The letters, they hold the key to fixing things, to finding redemption." Clara was silent, unsure of what to say next. The story was far more complicated than she had imagined, and now she understood why David kept everything hidden. But the question remained. Would he find peace with his past, or was it too late to change things? David took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he held the letters. He continued, "These letters are from her. She wrote them while she was dying. The doctors told me she only had a few weeks left, and I didn't even have the chance to tell her how sorry I was." Clara's heart ached as she listened to David's words. She could hear the pain in his voice, and she felt deeply for him. It was clear that his regrets had haunted him for years. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" Clara asked softly, her voice full of empathy. David looked at her, his gaze softening. I was ashamed, Clara. I couldn't bring myself to admit that I had failed not just her, but myself. I had it all: money, power, success. But none of it mattered when I lost her. Clara placed a hand on his arm. David, you don't have to carry that alone anymore. I want to help you, if you'll let me. For a moment, there was silence between them. David's eyes were filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. He had spent so many years trying to forget his past, but now, for the first time, he felt like maybe he could face it with someone by his side. I don't know if I can ever make up for what I did, he said, his voice cracking slightly. But those letters might hold the key to understanding what I need to do. I'm just not sure if I'm ready to face them. Clara smiled gently. You don't have to do it alone. We can figure this out together. David nodded slowly, the weight of the letters in his hand feeling heavier than ever. I don't even know what the letters say yet, but I'm afraid that once I read them, there's no going back. Clara looked into his eyes, her voice steady and reassuring. Whatever the letters say, we'll face it together. You don't have to be afraid. David took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, with Clara by his side, he could finally start healing. With trembling hands, he began to unfold the first letter. Clara watched closely, feeling the gravity of the moment. She had no idea what was coming, but she knew that whatever it was, it would change everything. As David began to read, his voice was shaky at first, but then it steadied as he began to piece together the words his late wife had written to him. The letter spoke of love, loss, and the deep pain she had felt when he had neglected her. She had loved him until the end, but her final wish was for him to find peace, to let go of the past and to forgive himself. David's eyes welled up with tears as he read the last words. I hope you can forgive yourself, David. I wish you could have seen the person I know you could be. But if you truly love me, let go of the guilt. Live your life to the fullest. Don't let it be consumed by regret. Clara watched as David wiped away a tear. She felt the weight of those words, knowing that they were the closure he needed, but had been avoiding. He had been carrying this burden for so long, but now he had the chance to start anew. David looked up at Clara, his face filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. I never knew she still loved me after everything. I thought I'd lost her forever. Clara smiled softly. She never stopped loving you, David. She just wanted you to forgive yourself and live the life you deserve. David took a deep breath and looked at the chest of letters one more time. He felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders, and for the first time in a long while he felt free. Free from the past and free to move forward. Thank you, Clara, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. I don't think I could have faced this alone. Clara smiled warmly, her heart swelling with affection for him. I'll always be here for you, David. Whatever you need. As David placed the letters back into the chest, he realized that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. But with Clara by his side, he knew he could face it. The road to healing wouldn't be simple, but it was a road he was now ready to walk down. The mystery of the letters had brought them closer together, and David knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter in both of their lives. And as Clara stood beside him, she couldn't help but wonder, what other surprises lay ahead in this strange, unexpected bond they had formed? The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, David felt like he was ready to face it. David took another deep breath, feeling the weight of the letters still in his hands. As he looked up at Clara, he knew that this moment was the turning point of his life. The pain he had carried for so long was starting to fade, replaced by a new sense of purpose and hope. I'm ready, he said quietly, meeting Clara's gaze. Ready to let go of the past and move forward. Clara smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. You don't have to carry that burden anymore, David. It's time for a fresh start. With Clara's support, David spent the next few months working through the letters, taking steps toward healing, and slowly rebuilding his life. He dedicated time to charity, helping those in need, and doing the kind of work that he knew his late wife would have been proud of. The guilt that had haunted him for so long slowly started to disappear, replaced by a sense of peace. As the weeks passed, David and Clara's bond grew even stronger. The connection they shared was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced before. What had started as a simple act of kindness, helping a stranger, had blossomed into something far deeper. One day, as they sat together in his living room, David looked at Clara and took her hand in his. "Clara," he said softly, "I never would have believed that a single moment could change my entire life. But you've done that. You've shown me what it means to love again, to forgive myself, and to live in a way that honors the people who mattered most to me." Clara squeezed his hand gently, her heart full. "You've always had the strength inside you, David. You just needed someone to remind you of it." David smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly happy, truly at peace. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Clara. I want to build a future together," he said, his voice full of sincerity. Clara's eyes sparkled with emotion. "I'd love that, David." And so together, they began a new chapter, one filled with love, forgiveness, and endless possibilities. David had learned that the most unexpected moments in life could lead to the greatest changes, and sometimes all it took was a little kindness and a lot of courage to make those changes happen. As they stood up hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held, David knew that he had finally found the peace he had been searching for. It wasn't the wealth or the status that had changed him. It was the love and understanding that Clara had shown him. And with that, David's heart felt full, ready to embrace the beautiful, unpredictable journey that lay ahead. Thank you for joining us on this Heartline story. What she learned changed everything. Sometimes life has unexpected turns. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.